The fourth night felt different, heavier, the air thick enough to chew. The smooth gestation, 104.7 FM, finally betrayed its composure just after 1:30 AM, dissolving into a sizzling static that made Elias's teeth ache. He killed the radio, plunging the laundromat into a silence so profound it felt like an auditory vacuum. He checked the clock, 1:55 AM. 5 minutes until the absolute boundary. He tried to distract himself by wiping down the aluminum counter, but his attention was pulled, gravitationally, toward the far corner where the 34 metal boxes sat in monolithic rows. Specifically, the line of sight that ended on machine number 9. It was dead, of course. All the machines were empty and inert. They had been for hours. Yet, a low-frequency hum began to vibrate through the concrete floor, a resonant thrum that bypassed the ears and settled directly in the chest cavity. The reflection of the fluorescent lights on the polished chrome casing of Machine 9 seemed to deepen, drawing the light inward rather than reflecting it. Elias's training, that meticulous, architectural precision, warred with the primitive survival instinct screaming at him to turn away. He focused on the counter edge, pressing his knuckles white. The hum intensified at precisely 2:01 AM. He kept his head down, tracing the grain of the laminated rule card. Asterisk never approach machine number 9 if it is running between 2 AM and 4:00 AM. Asterisk but was it running? It wasn't spinning, but the internal resonance felt more active than anything mechanical. It felt alive. To break the focus, he lifted his eyes, intending to sweep his gaze across the counter area. Instead, driven by some subconscious compulsion, his vision tracked horizontally across the massive bank of dryers opposite the washers. He started counting without meaning to, a silent, rhythmic pulse of recognition, 1, 2, 3. The process was instantaneous, a reflex built from nights of enforced vigilance. He reached the end of the row. 33. Elias stopped breathing. He knew the rules. Asterisk never count the dryers. There are 34. Asterisk he had seen 34 every night. He had counted 34 when he first memoized the layout. He checked again, slowly, painstakingly. He started from the left, tracing the metallic edges, the faded numbers etched into the casing. 1, 2, 3. He finished the row. 35. A cold sweat broke out along his spine. He shook his head sharply. This was exhaustion. This was the stale air and the lukewarm coffee playing tricks on his perception. He forced his eyes back to the card. 34. He would not look at them again. The knowledge that the numbers were fluid, that the stability of the concrete bunker was negotiable, was worse than the sound coming from Machine 9. The 2 hours between 2 AM and 4 AM stretched into an eternity defined solely by the oppressive hum and Elias's frantic refusal to look toward the dryers or the distant glass doors. When the clock finally turned 4:01 AM, the hum cut out instantly, leaving a painful silence in its wake. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Just before 5 AM, a customer, a man Elias had never seen before, cloaked entirely in a heavy, dark green coat despite the moderate indoor temperature, retrieved his load from dryer 17. The man didn't make eye contact, moved with an unsettling, gliding grace, and was gone without a sound. Elias approached the freshly vacated area to wipe down the surface. He paused. Nestled between the metal base of dryer 17 and the wall, glinting faintly under the harsh light, was a small object. It was a block, worn smooth by countless touches, carved into the rudimentary shape of a small, stylized elephant. Rule 4, asterisk never touch any object left behind after closing time, especially if it resembles a child's toy. Asterisk. The air around the wooden elephant was distinctly colder. It pulsed with a residual energy, silent and demanding. It was an invitation, a challenge left by the previous occupant. Elias fought the instinct to sweep it up, to sanitize the space. He took a wide detour around it, fetching a yellow plastic cone marked a wet floor, which he placed deliberately, almost ritually, 3 feet away, establishing a sterile zone. He was terrified, but he was compliant. He had survived the shift, bending under the stress but not breaking the rules. He just had to make it to 6 AM. Elias retrieved the mop and the industrial disinfectant. The pale pink sludge resisted, clinging to the stainless steel. Every swipe felt like an acknowledgement of the horror that had just transpired, an attempt to erase the memory of a 35-year-old crime. By the time he was done, the clock read 3:15 a.m. Dolly was already by the service door, meticulously checking a handwritten ledger that looked almost as old as Victor's original crime. Rule 6, Elias, she reminded him without turning around. The count. He walked the cold aisle, dragging his fingers along the casings of the quiet machines. He started with the dryers, at D1 through D6. Then the washers. So 1, so 2. He paused slightly at so 9, now silent and inert, a mere appliance again, its glass porthole oddly clean and empty. He continued, counting methodically, reaching the end of the long bank. 28 washers. 6 dryers. 34 total. 34, Dolly, he reported. She made a precise note in the ledger. Good. If the count ever exceeds 34, you have a new problem, Elias. A new entity trying to register itself here. Something that shouldn't exist. Remember Rule 5. That's how we know the perimeter is secure. The experience of machine So 9 redefined Elias's work. The silence between 2:17 a.m. and 3 a.m. was no longer merely peaceful, it was a pressurized, waiting void. He was perpetually on edge, monitoring the timers, terrified of the next *KRKRT star. Dolly left early that morning, but her presence, her specific rules, lingered like the metallic scent of old, dried blood. He survived the next night by walking the aisles constantly, resisting the urge to sit. He focused solely on the cold casing and the silent faces of the clocks. 2 nights after Victor's cycle, the shift began routinely, but exhaustion was setting in, heavy and insidious. Elias had been checking the temperature of machine So 14 at 2:05 a.m. It was running a scheduled load Dolly had insisted on, industrial kitchen towels from a downtown restaurant. The drum tumbled with dull efficiency, creating a hypnotizing, churning vortex of fabric and foam. Elias was dangerously tired. His eyes drifted. He had trained himself to check the machines via peripheral vision, keeping his head angled away from the glass. But fatigue made him sloppy. He glanced down, just for a fraction of a second, to confirm the machine was securely latched. And then he saw it. Not his reflection, not exactly. Reflected in the wet, distorted curve of the spinning glass was a shape that definitely wore his uniform shirt, but the face was profoundly wrong. It was a stretched, elongated mask of profound distress. The eyes, usually Elias's own familiar shade of brown, were large, empty pools reflecting only the harsh fluorescent light. And the mouth was a wide, unnaturally curved line, pulled taut in a silent, desperate scream. It wasn't Elias Thorne looking back. It was the face of a man caught in the middle of an unspeakable act, terrified of the stain he couldn't erase. It was the fleeting, optical manifestation of Victor Sterling's guilt, imposed upon his own features. A spike of ice water shot through Elias's veins. He recoiled violently, stumbling back against the detergent shelf, sending a box of powder crashing to the concrete floor. The face in the glass vanished instantly, replaced by the normal, swirling image of soapy water and tumbling cloth. The reflection of Elias Thorne, pale, sweating, and panicked, returned, superimposed over the churning load. He stood there, gasping for breath, clutching his chest. Dolly hadn't explained why they shouldn't look. Now he knew. The machines didn't just contain Victor's eternal punishment, sometimes, they captured the exact moment of his greatest terror, momentarily substituting the observer's identity for the murderer's guilt. The machine had tried to drag Elias into the spiritual framework of the crime, demanding that he, too, recognize the horrifying permanence of the stain. He checked the clock. 2:06 a.m. He had violated Rule 3, and never looked directly into your reflection in the glass of the running machine after 2 a.m. It was too early for Rule 1, but the threat felt immediate and personal, a psychological echo that was far worse than the objective horror of the bloody machine. Elias cleaned up the spilled detergent, his movements shaky and inefficient. He didn't call Dolly. Rule 3 wasn't a breach that triggered her arrival, it was a test of personal discipline. He had failed the test, and the consequence was internal, a seed of madness planted in the quiet hours. He spent the remainder of the night hunched over his desk, staring fixedly at the concrete floor, convinced that if he looked up, the distorted, screaming face would be waiting for him in the shadow of the ceiling tiles. The next day, Dolly didn't mention the spill, but when she handed him the cleaning roster, she pointedly tapped Rule 3 with a sharp fingernail. "Sloppiness kills, Elias," she said. "The rules are structural integrity. They keep *U* whole." That night, Elias was meticulous. He checked the timers early. By 1:45 a.m., everything was quiet, cold, and still. He settled at his desk, determined to ride out the 2:17 a.m. danger window by focusing on the mundane. He opened a dog-eared paperback, trying to lose himself in fiction, but the narrative felt thin and unreal compared to the concrete reality of the basement. 1:58 a.m. Thump. Elias jolted upright. The sound was flat, heavy, and wet, like a piece of raw meat dropped onto the floor. It came from the aisle between the machines. He stood slowly, peering over his desk. In the narrow corridor between the row of running washers and the back wall, sitting innocently beside machine So-19, was a single, perfectly folded white dress shirt. It was immaculate, starched, and crisply pressed. It looked like it belonged in the window of a high-end menswear shop. Except for one detail, there was a perfectly circular hole, the size of a 50-cent piece, right in the center of the chest. And surrounding that hole, staining the pristine white fabric in a precise, almost artistic starburst, was an impossible amount of fresh, still wet crimson blood. Elias's eyes darted to the clock, at 2 a.m. Rule 4, and never touch or remove any item deposited inside or outside a running machine. Machine So-19 was running a normal load, towels, as scheduled. The shirt was clearly not part of the load. It had appeared, deposited perfectly, beside the machine. Elias took a shallow breath, the coppery scent of the blood already beginning to mingle with the residual scent of detergent and concrete dust. He felt an overwhelming, illogical urge to remove it. It was evidence. It was too disturbing to be left there. It ruined the sterility of the floor. He took a step forward. Then he heard Dolly's voice in his head, "If you touch it, Victor will assume you are interfering." This wasn't an echo of Victor's guilt, this was something else. This was a physical manifestation of trauma, a tangible object bleeding onto the floor, placed deliberately in the service wing of Victor's hell. Elias backed away, pressing his spine against the wall near the phone. He watched the shirt. The blood was spreading slowly, soaking into the concrete. He lifted the receiver, his hand steadying slightly. He didn't know what this was, but it violated the quiet dignity of the rules. "Dolly," he whispered, his eyes locked on the bleeding garment. "Machine 19. It's not running Victor's cycle, but there's a shirt. White, heavily stained. Fresh blood. It just appeared. Is the machine running, Elias?" Dolly's voice was instantly alert. "Yes. Normal load. But the shirt is outside it. Beside it. It's bleeding." A heavy sigh came across the line. "Rule 4. It's a law, Elias. A new form of interference. Victor is trying to test your empathy. Or his victims are trying to make a statement." She paused, the sound of her own steady breathing filling the silence. "Do not go near it. Do not look directly at the blood, Elias. Do not look into the hole in the chest. That shirt is a statement of finality. A piece of the past that refused to be washed away." Dolly didn't come in this time. She stayed on the line, forcing Elias to keep his gaze high, above the level of the folded fabric. "Look at the clock, Elias," she ordered. "Watch the time. The shirt is designed to hold your attention until 2:17 a.m. If you are distracted, you won't catch the next cycle starting." Elias tore his gaze away from the bright white and awful red. He forced himself to stare at the digital display, counting down the minutes to the hour of absolute stillness. 2:08 a.m. 2:09 a.m. . The coppery smell was now so strong it felt like he was breathing iron. He remained pinned to the wall, his focus strained between the ticking clock and the silent, bleeding accusation lying on the floor. He knew, instinctively, that if he dropped his guard for a second, if he let his gaze fall to the single, empty bullet hole, he would be seeing the world through the victim's final moments, and he would never be able to unsee it. He was learning, day by agonizing day, that the structures of Midnight Spin were not built on convenience, but on keeping the living separate from the endless suffering of the dead. The isolation of Providence, Rhode Island, was absolute, etched into the concrete landscape surrounding Midnight Spin Laundromat. It was a sterile, perpetually cold space designed for utility, smelling faintly of old bleach, damp cotton, and the faint, metallic tang of aging infrastructure. Elias Thorne, a dropout architect seeking oblivion more than employment, found his last sanctuary here, a final, absurd line of defense against the chaos of his own life. He met Dolly Vance at 11:58 p.m., precisely 2 minutes before midnight. Dolly was a woman forged from decades of nicotine and fatigue, her eyes holding the knowledge of things that should not exist. She didn't offer a pleasantry, she offered the job. "It's simple, Elias," she rasped, handing him a laminated plastic card. It was thick, slightly oily, and bore the title, "The 6 Absolute Rules of the Midnight Spin." You are the nocturnal custodian. You keep the lights on and the peace. Mostly, you obey. Elias, desperate for the minimum wage and the solitary refuge, nodded. Dolly tapped the card with a nicotine-stained finger. These are not suggestions. They are the scaffolding holding reality together in this building. Break one, and you're not just fired. You're history. He read them under the harsh fluorescent lights, the 6 Absolute Rules. 1. Do not engage with Machine 9 after 2:17 a.m. 2. Always keep the doors locked between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. No exceptions for late customers. 3. Never look directly into a reflection, especially stainless steel surfaces. 4. Do not touch misplaced items. Toys, jewelry, clothing that is not yours. 5. Always ensure the radio is tuned to 104.7 FM, jazz. Silence is worse. 6. Never count the machines after 3 a.m. There are 34 washers and 34 dryers. No more. Elias committed them to memory, the weight of the last 4 rules pressing down on him. They sounded like the instructions for surviving a haunted house, not cleaning lint traps. His first 3 nights were characterized by a suffocating silence, broken only by the velvety, mournful tones of 104.7 FM, Miles Davis pouring into the vast, empty room. Elias moved with paranoid precision. He checked the machine counts before 3 a.m., 34/34. He scrubbed the lint traps. He kept his gaze focused on the industrial floor tiles, avoiding the polished chrome of the machines. The rules, though absurd, gave him structure. They were the last piece of architecture he needed to keep his own mind from collapsing. He survived the first 3 nights. The curse initiated on the 4th night, precisely at 2:17 a.m. Elias was seated behind the counter, flipping through a textbook on structural analysis, the low hum of the industrial machines a hypnotic drone. The smooth melody of a trumpet solo on 104.7 FM was suddenly mutilated by a grating, metallic screech, a sound like iron teeth grinding against stone. Machine washer number 9 had violated Rule 1 first, not Elias. It whirred to life, a cycle initiating without input. The vibrations rattled the floor tiles nearby, far exceeding the normal operational noise. Elias froze, clutching the laminated card in his sweaty hand. He approached cautiously. The sight within the circular glass portal was horrific. The water wasn't clear, it was a deep, unsettling Venus red, the color of fresh human blood. And the movement wasn't the gentle agitation of fabric, it was a violent, internal spasm. Fabric, or something that looked like shredded cloth, fought desperately inside the churning, bloody vortex, giving the impression of a frantic, drowning struggle. Elias backed away and immediately called Dolly. Machine 9, he whispered into the phone, his throat tight. It started itself. At 2:17. The water, it's red. There was a heavy sigh on the other end, not of surprise, but of profound weariness. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't go near the glass. And for the love of God, don't turn it off. Dolly arrived, looking paler and older than before. She ignored the blood-filled machine, her eyes fixed on Elias, searching for signs of permanent damage. "It's Victor," she stated flatly, pulling out a cigarette and lighting it without concern for the no-smoking signs. "Victor who?" Dolly leaned against the folding table, the smoke swirling above her head. This place wasn't always Midnight Spin. 35 years ago, it was the laundry annex for Sterling Arms, an upper-crust boarding house. Victor Sterling was the son of the owner, a spoiled, sick bastard. She paused, taking a long drag. 1988, Victor went berserk. Murdered his whole family, father, mother, 2 servants. Stabbed them dozens of times. A bloodbath. When the police finally found him, he wasn't running. He was down here, in the basement laundry, stripped naked. Dolly pointed toward Machine 9, which continued its tortured cycle, the red water pulsing rhythmically. He was trying to wash the blood out of his clothes. He used this very machine. But the blood, Elias, it was too much. It soaked into the drum, into the concrete. He was arrested, convicted, died in prison years later. But his act, the obsessive need to cleanse an uncleansable sin, anchored him here. He's stuck in the loop, Elias realized, the architectural precision of the concept chilling him to the core. He is the cycle, Dolly confirmed. Every night, 2:17 a.m. He starts the wash. He tries to wash away the blood of his victims. He fails. That's the torture. And that's why Rule 1 exists. We don't engage, we don't look, and we don't interfere. If you interfere, or if you break any other rule, you become part of his geometry. You become another stain he tries to scrub out. Elias watched the bloody cycle spin. He understood now. This wasn't a standard haunting. This was a cosmic laundry schedule, where a murderer was doomed to fail his eternal chore, and Elias's job was simply to maintain the fragile, rule-bound barrier between Victor's damnation and the waking world. The terror of the supernatural was eclipsed only by the exhaustion. After the incident with Machine 9, the tension in the laundromat didn't dissipate, it thickened, settling like a layer of invisible dust. Elias hadn't slept properly since. Every slight sound, the refrigerator compressor, the settling of the floorboards, sounded like Victor Sterling shuffling closer. Psychological pressure began manifesting as sensory distortions. He heard phantom dripping, a relentless plink 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 near the service sink, but when he checked, the faucets were bone dry. He heard murmuring, indistinct and deep, seeming to emanate from the ductwork above. He felt observed, the shadows in the periphery growing denser, colder. Elias was meticulously following the rules, but the rules were designed only to prevent his interference. They couldn't stop Victor's agonizing presence from leaching into his sanity. It was 3:07 a.m. on the 6th night. Elias was pacing, driven by a deep, frantic need for quantifiable certainty. He needed proof that the world was still ordered, that 34 was still 34. Dolly's warning echoed, and never count the machines after 3 a.m. But the dripping sound was driving him mad, and he needed a solid number to anchor himself. He started counting aloud, whispering the numbers like a mantra, a 1, 2, 3, 4, 33, 34. Good. 34 washers, 34 dryers. He turned back toward the counter, a faint wave of relief washing over him, and then the air pressure dropped. A deafening, hollow clunk reverberated through the vast space. Elias spun around. Where the last industrial water cooler had stood, tucked against the back wall, there was now a new machine. It was a massive, industrial dryer, far larger than the others, entirely unlike the pristine white models surrounding it. This dryer was old, caked in rust and neglect, its steel housing pitted and scorched. Its circular opening was a hungry, lightless maw, seeming to absorb the harsh fluorescent light. 35. The 35th machine had materialized instantly, silently, occupying space that had been empty seconds before. Elias staggered back, his heart hammering against his ribs. The machine was solid, real, smelling faintly of ozone and pulverized dust. His violation of Rule 6 had not just resulted in a hallucination, it had physically warped the geometry of the room. The appearance of the 35th machine left Elias in a state of shock, his fear overriding his caution. As he stared at the impossible dryer, his gaze drifted downward. Nestled near the foot of the ominous new machine was an item, a child's toy. It was a small, mangled teddy bear, dirty white, missing an eye, its stitching frayed open at the seam, exposing clumps of ancient stuffing. Rule 4: Do not touch misplaced items. In his terror and exhaustion, the sight of the bear, a relic of pure, vulnerable innocence, struck Elias with perverse empathy. It felt like a cry for help. Against every shred of self-preservation, Elias crouched down, his fingers trembling, and gently picked up the bear. The consequence was immediate and visceral. Machine washer number 9, which had been silent since 2:18 a.m., began to move violently. The drum started spinning not just fast, but impossibly fast, generating a sound that transitioned from a mechanical whir to a high, keen shriek, the sound of pure torment. Elias dropped the bear, stumbling backward toward the counter. He stared at the glass of Machine 9. Inside the rapidly blurring vortex of blood and foam, a face flashed into view, pressed against the thick safety glass. It was Victor Sterling. His eyes were wide, filled with a frantic, animal terror, and his face was horribly pale. A deep, jagged slit ran horizontally across his throat, weeping black shadow instead of blood. The image lasted less than a second, yet it burned into Elias's retina, a clear, terrible glimpse of the man condemned to the cycle. The raw fear prompted a defensive reflex. Elias instinctually turned to the nearest reflective surface, the highly polished stainless steel facade of the large commercial folding table, to check if the specter was standing behind him. Rule 3: never look directly into a reflection. He looked. The reflection was not his. Victor Sterling was standing directly behind him in the mirrored steel. He was gaunt, dressed in a faded, blood-stained white undershirt and tattered work pants. He stood still, a figure of profound, agonizing desperation. Elias gasped, unable to move, trapped by the terrifying image. Victor didn't speak with his ruined throat. Instead, he raised a hand to the reflected glass, his fingers long and skeletal, and tapped sharply. Tap. 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 As he tapped, the reflection twisted, and the words formed on the stainless steel, etched momentarily into the surface as if written in condensed vapor: assault. Not soap. The message vanished, and Victor's image dissolved like smoke. Elias blinked, heart pounding, finding only his own reflection, haggard, wide-eyed, standing alone in the silent, unnerving laundromat. The external door lock rattled violently, and Dolly Vance burst in, her face etched with alarm. She stopped dead, staring at the empty back corner, where the 35th machine had stood moments before. "What did you do?" Dolly demanded, her voice shaking not with anger, but with genuine, mortal fear. The 35th machine was gone, yet the air still felt heavy, polluted. Elias could only point mutely to the service table, where the words were now gone, and then to the abandoned teddy bear on the floor. Dolly's eyes tracked the machine line, counting quickly. 34. God. You counted, didn't you? And you picked up the relic. She kicked the teddy bear away with a shudder. That was Ashley's. Ashley? The previous night watchman. 2 years ago. She found a misplaced ring, Rule 4. She tried to give it back to Victor. She became part of his perpetual wash cycle, a ghost trapped cleaning the lint traps forever. Before her, it was Dylan. He tried to count after 3 a.m. He saw 35 machines, and he tried to smash one. He never stopped seeing them. He drove his car into the bay. Dolly's face was hollowed out by grief. Elias, you broke 3 rules in less than 5 minutes. You've engaged him. He doesn't just want you gone, he wants you involved. We are losing the barrier. Elias ignored the fear and the history. His mind, the failed architect's mind, seized onto the single, tangible piece of data Victor had provided. Salt. Not soap, Elias murmured. Dolly looked at him strangely. What are you talking about? The reflection. He showed me the number of machines, he showed me the blood, but when I looked at him, he gave me instructions. Victor isn't trying to torment us. He's trying to finish his chore. He needs something that he doesn't have. Elias knew the laundry had become a ritual of failure. Victor Sterling was not a monster seeking endless victims, he was a trapped soul seeking absolution through impossible cleaning. And Elias, now directly implicated in the cycle, suddenly realized that the only way to survive the geometry of the midnight spin was not to follow the rules, but to break Rule 1 fundamentally, to help Victor succeed. He had the clue. Now he needed the chemical. Elias spent the next day obsessively reviewing the digitized archives of the Sterling Arms incident from 1988, using the small, dust-caked PC in the back office. Dolly had warned him against interference, but Elias knew the warnings were moot. He was already stained by the geometry of the loop. His focus was singular: assault. Not soap. In the police reports detailing the forensic cleanup, he found a mention of the required cleaning agents. Due to the sheer volume of blood, standard detergents were useless. The report specified the use of high-grade industrial agents for decontamination. He found it: sodium hypochlorite. Concentrated bleach. Not the diluted household soap, but the industrial compound, referred to in the technical specs as the salt. It was a powerful, restricted chemical, effective enough to erase massive biological contamination, the exact type of agent Victor Sterling would have needed, but likely couldn't access in a 1988 basement laundry room, especially while panicked. Elias's theory solidified: Victor's eternal torment wasn't the failure to wash the clothes, it was the failure to acquire the correct, powerful tool necessary to complete the task. The rules kept Elias safe, but they also kept Victor locked in a loop of insufficient resources. The solution required the most dangerous breach of all: active, physical engagement with Machine 9 while it was running. Breaking Rule 1. Elias began his preparation. He remembered seeing a storage drum, long forgotten, in the maintenance closet labeled with a biohazard warning and faded chemical names. It was the drum of concentrated sodium hypochlorite. It was still half full, heavy, and viscous. He dragged it out, placing it discreetly near the counter, along with a pair of thick rubber gloves. 2:16 a.m. Elias stood rigid, watching the clock tick. The air was dead quiet. The terror of the 35th dryer, its sudden, impossibly physical manifestation, had scorched away Elias's remaining capacity for simply enduring. Dolly's recounting of Dylan's slow descent into madness and Ashley's fatal attempt to leave had crystallized the stakes. Compliance brought survival, but survival was turning into a prolonged spiritual death. Elias sat on the cold linoleum floor near the staff clock-out machine, the only light coming from the green glow of the unused open-air sign. He clutched the laminated card bearing the 6 absolute rules, the edges now frayed from constant handling. Dolly had left moments ago, retreating to her tiny office, the weight of the night pressing her into premature exhaustion. Moi. Kong Phi Xa Form. The phrase echoed, a low, guttural suggestion whispered against the glass, not a threat, but a plea. It was the only tangible clue Victor Sterling had ever offered, the only deviation from the relentless cycle of pain. Elias knew that if he continued to merely follow the rules, he would eventually be claimed by the slow erosion of his sanity, just like the others. To survive, he had to intervene. He spent the remaining hours until dawn not cleaning, but researching. Midnight Spin offered no internet, but Dolly had shown him where the real archives were: a damp, forgotten storage room behind the broken cigarette machine, containing decades of Providence municipal records relating to the building, Sterling Arms. Elias hunched over brittle, yellowing microfiche reports from 1988. He skipped past the lurid photographs of the victims and focused on the hazmat reports and the forensic cleanup logs following the Sterling Arms massacre. The documents detailed the sheer volume of biological residue left by Victor Sterling, who had, according to police reports, attempted to wash the blood-soaked clothes of his victims in the communal laundry room before the police arrived. The logs repeatedly mentioned the difficulty in remediation. Standard detergents and household bleach had been ineffective against the scale of the contamination. Elias cross-referenced the chemical inventory of the 1988 cleanup crew. And there it was, the specific mention of industrial-grade sodium hypochlorite, a hyperconcentrated form of lye and chlorine compound, colloquially referred to by old maintenance crews as the salt because of the caustic, drying residue it left behind. It was a chemical so volatile and potent that its use in residential settings had been severely restricted shortly after the Sterling Arms incident. The revelation hit Elias with the force of a physical blow. Victor Sterling wasn't a malicious entity trying to simply scare people away, he was a mechanism of eternal, self-imposed torture. He was trapped because his final, desperate act of purification, the cleansing of his sins, was incomplete. He couldn't access the right tool, the industrial power required to erase the indelible stains he had created. He needed the salt. Victor was not haunting Midnight Spin, he was stuck doing laundry. Elias closed the files, his hands trembling not from fear, but from the terrifying clarity of his mission. To break the loop, he had to violate the most sacred and deadly of all the laws, Qetac1, Kong Bao Gio Juok Kan Thiep Vao Bat Ky Mei Giat Hot Mei Say Nao Dang Hot Dong Sao 2 o'clock Sang. Rule 1, and never interrupt or touch a machine in use after 2 a.m. He had until 2:17 a.m. of the next night. The planning was meticulous. The chemical, sodium hypochlorite, was banned for retail, but Midnight Spin was an old, industrial structure. Chemicals were often forgotten, not disposed of. Elias began methodically searching the cavernous, cobweb-draped maintenance room, a room Dolly rarely entered, trusting him to keep the laundry machines running. He found it tucked into the darkest corner, behind a stack of rusted dry vents. A heavy, opaque plastic jug, its label long since peeled away, the plastic yellowed and brittle. The jug was heavy, containing a thick, acrid liquid that smelled faintly of a swimming pool mixed with metallic rust. The jug was nearly full. The salt. Elias spent the early hours of the following evening reviewing the machines. Washing machine number 9 was an ancient, front-loading industrial beast. Its door locked with a heavy solenoid when activated. Forcing it open while running would be a fight against hundreds of pounds of churning water, hot steam, and the supernatural inertia of Victor's curse. He waited, the silence of Midnight Spin amplifying the thumping of his own heart. Dolly was asleep in her office. The clock on the wall crept towards the deadly hour. 2:16 a.m. Elias gripped the heavy plastic jug. He wore thick rubber gloves he'd found in the maintenance room, a meager defense against the potent chemical. He stood directly in front of the machine. The air grew heavy, thick with the damp, mineral scent that always preceded the phenomenon. 2:17 a.m. The deep, sickening thunk echoed through the massive room. Machine number 9 had begun its rotation. It wasn't the smooth, electrical hum of the other machines, it was a grating, wet sound, like bone grinding against steel. Elias approached. He could see the liquid sloshing inside the circular window, the familiar, ghastly deep red, the color of fresh, arterial blood, circulating endlessly, refusing to clean. This was the point of no return. Violating Rule 1 meant inviting Victor's immediate, lethal retribution, not just his passive, psychological warfare. He braced himself. He had to hit the manual safety release, a lever hidden beneath a metal panel on the machine's side, at the precise moment he applied pressure to the main latch. It required coordination, strength, and perfect timing to override the industrial lock. He slammed his elbow into the side panel, freeing the lever. A scorching jet of steam hissed out, burning his forearm through his thin shirt. He ignored the pain, his focus absolute. He grabbed the heavy, chrome latch of the main door. Qetac1, Kong Juok Kan Thiep. Elias pulled. The machine roared, the internal churning increasing in speed, as if the entity trapped inside recognized the assault on its mechanism of punishment. The glass window shimmered with an indistinct, shadowy shape pressed against the inner surface. Elias strained, muscles bulging, the heat radiating off the machine immense. He felt a sharp, metallic pain in his ears, a high-pitched whine that was not mechanical. He heard a whisper right beside his head, cold and furious, a dumb lie. Korsa Kong Juok Sak. Stop. You will not be clean. With a final, desperate heave, the safety lock snapped. The door burst open with the force of the churning water. Elias was immediately assaulted by a blast of scorching, bloody steam. He stumbled backward, gasping, wiping the scalding fluid from his eyes. The interior of the machine was a maelstrom of violent, red liquid, and old, sodden fabric. Elias righted himself instantly. He lifted the heavy jug of sodium hypochlorite. He leaned forward, ignoring the screams that now seemed to emanate directly from the metal drum, a synthesized shriek of human pain and mechanical protest. He tipped the jug and poured the entire, thick, acrid contents into the churning, bloody abyss. The effect was instantaneous and violent. Where the chemical met the bloody water, a cloud of toxic, greenish-yellow vapor erupted. The deep red liquid began to foam wildly, changing hue immediately. The machine convulsed, shaking violently on its mounts, sounding like a dying animal choking on salt and fire. The screams escalated into a single, drawn-out, agonizing shriek of spectral release. The water, only moments ago the deep, unforgiving color of fresh blood, began to change. It shifted from red to a sickly, frothing pink, then quickly to an opaque, milky white, the color of lye reacting with organic residue. And then, silence. The violent churning ceased. The milky water drained instantly, rushing down the central drainpipe with a final, echoing gurgle. The lye solution was gone, leaving only the clothes inside, limp, still steaming, but undeniably, completely clean. The water that remained, dripping slowly from the drum's interior, was crystal clear. Elias stood motionless, breathing heavily, the smell of industrial bleach burning his nostrils. He had violated the absolute rule. He had interrupted the cycle. He waited for the entity to manifest, for the crushing weight of the violated reality to consume him. But the room was quiet. Only the gentle, familiar tune of 104.7 FM jazz radio filled the immense void left by the machine's sudden silence. Providence, Rhode Island, was a city built on cold stone, layered with history, and perpetually damp with the promise of rain. But the section Elias Thorne now occupied felt less like history and more like an abandonment. Midnight Spin, a 24-hour industrial laundry service, occupied the ground floor of what was once the Sterling Arms residential tower, a concrete monolith that had weathered better than its inhabitants. The air inside was perpetually thick with the metallic tang of old machinery, stale bleach, and the faint, sweet scent of decay that the chemicals could never truly mask. Elias, 31, a man whose portfolio of failed architectural designs was longer than his resume, had come to Providence fleeing the slow, systemic collapse of his own life. Midnight Spin was his final sanctuary, a place where complexity was replaced by the simple, brutal cycle of wash, dry, fold. His new job was the overnight shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., alone, under the watchful, weary eye of Dolly Vance. Dolly Vance was 60, with hands like knotted ropes and eyes that held the tired knowledge of someone who had seen exactly how thin the veil between order and chaos truly was. She met Elias in the cramped, yellow-lit utility closet that served as her office, not bothering with pleasantries. "It pays cash, $18 an hour, and you don't talk to the few pathetic souls who show up at 3 a.m., Dolly stated, her voice gravelly. "You keep the machines running, you keep the floor clean, and you stay out of trouble." She slid a thick, laminated plastic card across the chipped Formica counter. It was the color of dried blood and bore 6 specific mandates in stark, black courier font. "These are the rules, Elias. The absolute rules. You follow them, or you don't just get fired. You cease to exist here." Dolly's gaze bore into him, devoid of exaggeration or malice, simply stating a fact of nature. "Read them. Memorize them. They are your life support." Elias picked up the card, the plastic cold and inflexible against his palm. The rule stated, "Do not interfere with any machine that starts operating between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. They are self-contained cycles. Let them finish. Do not acknowledge any specific machine, resident, or customer, as unlucky or cursed. They are all merely machines. Do not look into the mirror or any reflective surface, glass, stainless steel, polished chrome, between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., unless absolutely necessary for safety. If you must, do not linger. Do not touch or move any item left behind by a patron, regardless of its seeming significance or value, until 7 a.m. Do not under any circumstances leave the premises before 7 a.m. If the exterior door locks, do not try to force it open. Do not count the machines, washers or dryers, after 3 a.m. There are exactly 34 total. No more. No less. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his stomach, far heavier than the typical anxiety of a new job. These were not safety rules, they were rituals. "What happens if I break one?" he asked, the sound of his own voice thin in the overwhelming silence of the enormous room. Dolly leaned forward, her face tired. The machine demands a payment, Elias. The machine always demands a payment. And the payment is always measured in pieces of your reality, or perhaps, pieces of you. Elias accepted the job. He had nowhere else to go. The first 3 nights were a study in heavy, echoing quiet. The primary sound was the gentle, rhythmic murmur of 104.7 FM, broadcasting cool, contemplative jazz, a soundtrack both soothing and unnerving in the industrial wasteland. Elias meticulously wiped down the folding tables, refilled the detergent dispensers, and swept up the lint. He avoided the bank of machines, ensuring his proximity was purely functional. He memorized the layout, 17 washers lining the east wall, 17 dryers lining the west. 34. He learned to move without looking at his reflection in the vast, polished steel surfaces of the dryers after 1 a.m. He learned to step over stray socks and forgotten paperbacks, strictly adhering to Rule 4. He walked the concrete aisles with the precision of a priest walking consecrated ground, every movement dictated by the laminated card tucked securely in his breast pocket. But the silence was not truly empty. It was weighted, pregnant with expectation, an unnerving quiet that suggested the room was holding its breath, waiting for him to fail, waiting for 2 a.m. The shift from the heavy silence of the night to the mechanical aggression of the morning usually occurred around 6 a.m., but on the 4th night, the change came early, and violently. 2:17 a.m. Elias was folding a stack of oversized bath towels near the back of the facility, the low, mournful saxophone notes drifting from the radio. The air suddenly dropped 10 degrees. The rhythmic humming of the building's ventilation systems seemed to inhale sharply and stop.